My father uninvited me from my sister's wedding, then he called in panic when I revealed I owned every wedding vendor. I was at my home studio when my folks phoned. There are not enough seats for everyone at the wedding. Cuts had to be made, and you were among them. You understand, correct? I took a big breath, but I'd already written a speech, and my airfare cost $750. It is non-refundable, Lucas. My father's voice sliced through like a dagger. This is a formal occasion. People eat with many forks. Your sister's CEO pals will be there, and we understand that crowds make you uneasy. Dad, I'm 29. Remember to eat before you contact us back. You feel irritable when you're hungry. Beep. He hung up. My chest was filled with chilly dread. I dropped out of film school 7 years ago, and they still couldn't pretend I was important. An hour later, I received another call. It was their wedding planner. Mr. Lucas, this is Hannah from Wedding Love. I am phoning concerning your sister's wedding next month. Your family contacted us regarding certain modifications. My stomach sank. What type of changes? They've removed you totally off the guest list, but they've also asked that we keep your $55,000 payment for the videography package. Your mother stated that the family had already earmarked those monies for other wedding expenditures. I insisted on paying for the videography package so that I could give my sister something unique. My hands were shaking now, but not out of despair. Hannah, I need to ask you something. What is the name of your wedding venue? The Horizon Estate is located downtown. Why? And who owns the property? I heard papers shifting. It is classified under Vision Media Group. My voice was steady now. How about the catering company? Silver Fork Catering, although I'm not sure why. She paused. Wait, it is also Vision Media Group. Keep going, the florist, DJ, and limousines. Her respiration quickened as I said each name. Mr. Lucas, are you telling me that I own every vendor for this wedding? Every single one. The words felt odd coming out. 7 years of making people believe I was struggling while discreetly building $1 million company in advertisements. 7 years later, you obtain a real job, and we recall what occurred at your prom as if I were still the awkward adolescent who stomped on Sarah's friend's dress. Cancel everything, I murmured gently, every contract and every reservation. Send my parents an itemized bill that outlines exactly what their actual budget should cover. They can retain my videography deposit because they've already spent it. But sir, the wedding is in 4 weeks. There are 150 guests. Then they should start making calls. After I hung up, I sat in my studio, surrounded by equipment that they dismissed as an expensive hobby. My phone vibrated with a text from Mom. Lucas, we have made our decision. Nonetheless, the invitation included a clothing code. We understand how difficult those are for you. When you obtain a real job, you'll comprehend these choices. Do not contact your sister, I typed back. Understood. Good luck with the merchants. I was retrieving film from a disk when my phone burst with calls. I didn't recognize Mom, Dad, or my sister's numbers. I allowed them to ring till Dad phoned for the 6th time. Lucas. His voice had lost all of its cockiness. He was scared and nearly screamed. Every vendor has just canceled. The location, the caterer, and everyone. There's been a catastrophic error. Make no mistake, Dad. They all work for me. The hush was so perfect that I could hear him breathing. That is impossible. You produce little videos. You are hardly able to afford. I create advertisements for Nike, Dad. Every vendor you recruited reports to me. We can figure it out. You're still family. Family? I laughed. You were scared an hour ago that I wouldn't be able to handle numerous forks. Lucas, don't be too sensitive. You know, we only want the finest. No, Dad. You desire a wedding that you cannot afford. The phone rang again. This time it was my sister. I nearly didn't respond, but something made me pick up. Lucas. Her voice was little and broken. She was weeping so hard she couldn't talk. What's happening? Mom and Dad are yelling. The venue phoned me personally. They stated everything was canceled. My rage subsided a little. Did you know they didn't invite me? What? Number. Mom mentioned that you had a major shoot that weekend and couldn't make it. Her sobbing became louder. I closed my eyes and felt the weight of what I'd done. They also retained my $55,000 deposit. They said they'd already spent it. $55,000. Lucas. Oh my God. I did not know. All of this was new to me. She was hiccuping now. That's how Mother used to do it when we were kids. Can you put it back? What about the vendors? My voice cracked. I apologize. But they have to learn. They can't keep treating me like way anymore. 7 years of being treated as if I were a child who couldn't use forks. But this is my wedding, she murmured. I had to pick between teaching my parents a lesson and celebrating my sister's most important day. I sat there gazing at my phone screen, Olivia's sobs running through my brain like a never-ending loop. My finger lingered over Isabella's contact, and I knew that whatever I did next would permanently affect my relationship with my family. My chest was still full with heated and stinging wrath. But now it was accompanied by the sound of my younger sister wailing over a disaster she had not caused. I hit the call button before I could reconsider my decision. Isabella answered the first ring, perhaps anticipating more chaos. I advised her to wait 24 hours before issuing the cancellation notifications so I could freeze everything while I decided what to do. She seemed relieved, said she'd suspend any vendor conversations, but warned me that some of them had already inquired about what was going on. I assured her I'd give her a definitive decision by tomorrow morning and hung up, feeling like someone had dropped a rock on my chest. I spent the next hour pacing around my studio, moving back and forth between the equipment racks and editing stations. My phone continued beeping on the desk, alerting me to incoming calls. I kept looking at it and seeing my father's name. 7 more attempts in 40 minutes. I let every single one go to voicemail because I wanted room to ponder without his worry or manipulation interfering with my thoughts. The studio felt different today. With all the cameras, lights, and equipment my parents disregarded as pricey toys. This equipment has paid for itself 100 times over. They had developed a business that they had no idea existed. And here I was, using it as leverage in a family conflict I never wanted to fight. Around midnight, I finally had myself listen to my father's voicemails. I sat at my desk, put the phone on speaker, and played them in order. The first one was enraged, his voice tense and accusatory, stating I was silly and childish. The second one was perplexed, wondering how this could have happened and demanding an explanation. By the fourth message, his tone had changed to anxious, even frantic, as he discussed how much money they'd already spent and how tough it would be to locate new suppliers so close to the wedding date. On the 8th try, he said we could talk about it like grown-ups because we were family, and family works things out. The irony struck me hard, coming from someone who treated me like a kid that morning and hung up when I tried to justify my travel. What struck me the most was that in none of those communications did he apologize or admit they had made a mistake. It was always about the problem I'd made, the mess I was making, not what they'd done to generate it. I erased all of the voicemails and phoned Lucas, even though it was late. He answered on the second ring, which didn't surprise me given that he was used to my unusual hours while we were finalizing assignments. I recounted the entire issue to him, from the uninvitation to the deposit to the fact that I had just threatened to ruin my own sister's wedding. He listened without interrupting, and when I finished, there was a long pause before he said, "We needed to think about the business implications, beyond just the family stuff." Lucas explained that if word spread that Vision Media Group had pulled contracts for personal reasons, it could seriously harm our reputation with other clients. He was not mistaken, and I knew it. We'd spent years creating a reputation for dependability and professionalism, and this appeared to be neither. We decided to meet first thing in the morning at the workplace to explore possibilities for protecting both my boundaries and the company's brand. I eventually fell asleep about 3:30 a.m. and awoke at 7:30 to my phone beeping non-stop on the nightstand. I received 17 new text messages, the most of which were from my mother. I browsed through them while lying in bed, watching her tactics change from message to message. The first ones were hostile, labeling me selfish and theatrical. The middle ones used guilt, claiming that I was hurting my sister's happiness and spoiling what should have been her finest day ever. The final several went further, claiming that this wasn't who they taught me to be, that families don't treat each other like this, and that I was being cruel because of wounded sentiments. The irony of the final line nearly made me laugh out loud. They didn't raise me to be successful either, but here I was operating a $1 million business they had no idea about. Lucas and I had a conference room meeting with Nathan at work that morning. Our company attorney set out all of the vendor contracts on the table and went through them one by one. He stated that legally, I had the right to terminate anything because Vision Media Group controlled the contracts. But he also said something I hadn't considered. Some of the contracts included penalty provisions that would cost my organization real money if we pulled out. We were looking at up to $18,000 in fees and missed deposits for Vision Media Group to cover, in addition to the $55,000 my parents had already invested. Nathan also cautioned me about the consequences of having a family feud spill over into corporate operations. He indicated that if I opted to reinstate the vendors, we required detailed documentation distinguishing this circumstance from typical business operations. We spent an hour discussing how to develop a written policy about conflicts of interest and contracts with family members to avoid such disasters in the future. My phone rang again while we were still in the meeting, and the screen displayed Liam's name. I genuinely liked Olivia's fiancé. He'd always been easy to talk to, and he'd never believed my parents' narrative about my work being a joke. I left the conference room to accept the call. He asked if we might meet for coffee that afternoon, just the two of us, to discuss what was going on. His voice was calm and steady, not angry or accusing, but just sensible. I said okay, and we agreed on a time of 3:30 at a coffee shop near my studio. Liam arrived right on schedule, looking exhausted yet calm. We picked a quiet corner table and I discussed the mediation approach that Nathan had proposed. He listened without interrupting and stated that he believed it was wise that Olivia needed this type of organized talk as well. He promised to speak with her that evening and get back to me. I drove back to my studio and opened my laptop to write the email requesting mediation. My fingers hesitated over the keyboard for a full minute before I began typing. I kept it brief and clear, stating that Nathan had recommended Shirley, a professional mediator, to assist us have a meaningful talk about what happened and how to proceed. I stated that I wanted to discover a route that would benefit everyone, but that we required clear communication and mutual respect to get there. I copied Olivia, my parents, Lucas and Nathan so that everyone got the same information. My finger trembled slightly as I pushed the submit button. Liam's response arrived within 5 minutes. He stated that he and Olivia were both eager to participate and appreciated my initiative. Olivia wrote a separate message 10 minutes later, expressing her relief and hope that this might help. Then I waited. My parents' response took 6 hours to arrive, just after 9 p.m. My mother had written it, and I could sense her hesitancy in each word. She stated that although this seemed excessive for a family disagreement, they would attend if it meant resolving the situation. The fact that she still referred to it as a quarrel rather than accepting what they had done informed me precisely how much effort this would entail. I emailed all replies to Nathan and requested him to contact Shirley to schedule the sessions. He responded the next morning, stating Shirley wanted to meet with me separately before the family session. We booked it for 2 days in her downtown office. I arrived 10 minutes late for my solo session with Shirley due to traffic. Her workplace was in a contemporary structure with glass walls and minimalist furnishings that exuded both professionalism and comfort. Shirley was probably in her 50s, with short gray hair and piercing eyes that could see right through anything you were putting up. She shook my hand firmly and motioned to the chair across from her desk. She began by outlining her methodology and asking what I expected from mediation. I gave her the typical response about wanting my parents to view me as an adult and appreciate my job choices. She nodded and took a note before gazing up at me with those keen eyes and asking if I really wanted a connection with my parents, or if I was simply searching for vindication. The question impacted me harder than I anticipated. I sat there for a bit, thinking about it, before telling her honestly that I didn't know. I said that I wanted them to perceive me as capable and successful, while also acknowledging that they had injured me, but I wasn't sure whether they were capable of such a transformation. I told her about 7 years of being dismissed and treated as if I couldn't manage fundamental adult circumstances. She asked specific questions about my business, the prom event that they kept bringing up, and my connection with Olivia. By the end of the hour, I believed she had grasped the entire magnitude of the problem. She said she'd meet with my parents next, then Olivia and Liam, before we all gathered for the first group session. The first mediation session was set 4 days after I canceled the vendors, leaving only 12 days before the wedding date. I got at Shirley's office 15 minutes early and waited in my car, trying to calm down. Olivia and Liam arrived a few minutes later, and we stepped inside together. My parents were already arrived, sitting in the waiting room with their arms crossed and matching faces of distress. Shirley escorted us into a bigger conference room with a circular table, forcing us to face each other. My folks sat to one side. I sat immediately opposite from them, while Olivia and Liam sat slightly to the side. Shirley sat at the head of the table and began by establishing ground rules for courteous communication and taking turns speaking without interruption. She underlined that we were here to talk about specific actions and their consequences, not to criticize one another's characters. My father hardly let her finish before stepping in. He said that the entire thing had been blown out of proportion, and that they had made a sensible seating selection that I took too personally. Shirley raised her hand and interrupted him in mid-sentence. She advised him to focus on the facts rather than his perceptions of my behavior. When she asked him to explain the specifics of what they decided and why, he moved in his seat and looked at my mother. Then he acknowledged they didn't invite me because they were scared I'd be uncomfortable among Olivia's business ties, which would reflect negatively on the family. The words remained in the air between us. I felt my chest tighten, but I pushed myself to remain cool and ask him directly what he meant by reflect poorly. He struggled through an explanation about formal gatherings, social expectations, and knowing what to say. My mother rushed in to support him, claiming they were attempting to shield me from an unpleasant scenario similar to the prom event years before. Shirley inquired about the prom incident, and I had to explain that when I was 17, I accidentally trod on my date's friend's dress and tore it. My parents supposedly used that against me for nearly a decade as proof that I couldn't handle formal social situations. Olivia's voice pierced through the tension, shaky yet forceful. She stated she had no clue they were still obsessed with prom, and that using a teenage mistake to explain not inviting me to her wedding was ridiculous. Liam instantly backed her up, pointing out that his family had never raised any reservations about my attendance, and that my parents appeared to be projecting their own anxieties onto the issue. Shirley switched the subject to the $55,000 deposit, and I noticed my mother's face turn pale. She attempted to explain that they viewed it as family money contributing to a family celebration, and that they had previously allocated those amounts to the venue improvements and culinary additions. I kept my voice calm as I explained that it was my money from my business, given as a particular gift for videography, and they had no right to reroute it without my permission. My father became protective, claiming that if I was truly successful, I wouldn't miss $55,000. Shirley asked him how he would feel if $55,000 was taken from him without his permission, regardless of his financial status. He had no decent explanation for it. The stillness stretched uncomfortably, yet it seemed essential. We spent the next hour discussing each individual point of hurt and misunderstanding. Shirley maintained our attention on specific activities, rather than character assaults. My parents began to admit some of their mistakes, but they continued to excuse everything with their intentions. Shirley emphasized that effect is more important than goal, and that their actions wounded me regardless of what they intended to accomplish. By the end of the session, we hadn't settled anything solid, but Shirley had persuaded my parents to commit to a second session and to seriously consider my situation. She assigned them homework to write precisely exactly what they did that was harmful and what they might have done differently. She also assigned me homework, which included writing down what a feasible way ahead looked like and what I was ready to compromise on. We all walked out of her office without speaking, and I waited in my car for 10 minutes before starting the engine. I drove home on autopilot, my hands holding the wheel more tightly than required. Back in my studio, I picked out the homework project Shirley had given me and gazed at the blank sheet for almost 20 minutes. The question was straightforward, but I kept going around it. What did I genuinely want out of all this? I began writing, and the words flowed faster than I anticipated. I wanted people to perceive me as someone who mattered, not as the awkward prom kid who couldn't handle formal meals. The wedding itself seems almost beyond the point now. It was about whether my parents could recognize me as an adult with a respectable work and life. I outlined my conditions in bullet points. A real apology that admitted what they had done wrong. A repayment plan for $55,000 that includes exact figures and dates. A vow to treat me with basic respect in the future, which meant no more remarks about my profession or capacity to function at formal gatherings. I stared over the list and felt a settling in my chest. These were not unreasonable expectations. They were just boundaries that every adult earned. The next day, I went over the list 3 times, ensuring sure each item was clear and explicit. I did not want vague pledges to do better. I needed tangible acts that they could really carry out. By the second mediation session, I had printed out my homework and marked the important passages. Shirley's workplace seemed different this time. My parents came just on time, both carrying files that were strangely prepared. We took the same seats as previously with the same anxiety in the air, but something had changed somewhat. Shirley began by asking my parents to share what they had written. My mother went first, bringing out numerous handwritten pages that astonished me. She had truly thought about this. She stated the uninvitation without attempting to soften it or make excuses. She wrote about taking the deposit without requesting permission, which was improper regardless of their intentions. She included critical comments about my profession, comparisons to Olivia's CEO buddies, and repeated reminders of prom as if I were still 17. Her voice trembled slightly when she read, and I could see her hands shaking on the pages. My father's list came next, and it was substantially shorter. He typed it on his phone, and the wording was sloppy, but he did admit that they should have consulted me before finalizing wedding plans. He stated that they had formed assumptions about my business without asking any questions. His speech was more defensive than my mother's. Lots of language like, in hindsight, and perhaps we could have. But at least he said something. Shirley allowed the stillness to stay for a time after they had finished reading. She then asked them specifically what they could have done differently in each case. My mother spoke first, her voice steadier now. She claimed they should have been open about their worries rather than making up reasons like large productions and seating arrangements. She revealed that they were concerned about being judged by Olivia's professional group and that they had pushed their concerns onto me rather than dealing with it directly. She mentioned how they had formed a vision of the ideal family in their minds, and I didn't match that image because I dropped out of film school. My father said, after a long pause, that they should have inquired about my business rather than presuming I was struggling. He hesitantly admitted that they'd always saw me as the awkward adolescent from prom rather than the adult I'd grown into. He added that they had never truly updated their mental image of who I was. Shirley agreed and took notes before asking them why they believed shifting that mental picture had been so tough. My mother's remark astonished me. She said that they had become accustomed to being ashamed about me. And habits are difficult to break, even if you know they are incorrect. I read my assignment next, my voice seeming calmer than I felt. I said that I needed them to see my career as real and to cease making comments that undercut my accomplishment. I reviewed some of the key customers I'd dealt with in recent years. Nike commercials that ran during primetime sporting events, Apple product launches that millions of people viewed, and big ad agencies that paid six figures for my services. I noticed the amazement on their expressions as I named these names. They really hadn't known. I also described what $55,000 meant to me. However, it was not all about money. It was my way of telling Olivia that I was thinking about her and wanted to make her day memorable. Having it stolen without a word was like being eliminated from the family. Like my input was meaningless since I didn't matter. My voice cracked slightly at the last part, but I kept going. I told them I'd spent 7 years constructing something genuine, and they treated me as if I was playing with costly toys. I'd let people think I was suffering because I didn't want to face their judgment. But it was my error. I should have sought recognition rather than concealing my accomplishment. Olivia began weeping before I finished reading. Her shoulders shook with sobbing. Not the peaceful ones she had shed before. Liam handed her tissues, and she attempted to gather her thoughts, but the words came out broken anyhow. She apologized for not sticking up for me before. She said she was so intent on preserving the peace and managing our parents' expectations that she had no idea how horribly they were treating me. She acknowledged she had heard the remarks about my profession throughout the years, but she ignored them as ordinary parental behavior, not realizing how much they totaled up. Liam wrapped his arm around her and talked straight to my parents. He stated that they wanted to make things right and were prepared to scale back the wedding greatly if it meant I was included and valued. He added that his own parents had been concerned about the size and expenditure from the start. They'd rather have something little and intimate. Anyway, Olivia nodded against his shoulder and stated that she had never wanted a large wedding in the first place. That had been our parents' vision, not her own. My parents appeared to have been smacked. My mother's face became pale, and my father shifted in his seat uneasily. Shirley waited until the timing was right to speak. She gently pointed out that their obsession with appearances seems to be at the heart of most of this dispute. The huge wedding was all about dazzling guests. Uninviting me was to avoid embarrassment. Taking the deposit was about sustaining the image they wished to present. She asked them outright if their friendship with me was more important than impressing Olivia's CEO buddies. My mother replied yes instantly, her voice strong. My father waited a while to respond. He stared at me, then at Olivia, and then back at Shirley. He finally replied yes, despite his stiff jaw. Shirley took note and inquired about the practical implications. What aspects of the wedding were they willing to modify in order to promote family bonds above appearance? The stillness stretched out awkwardly, and I could see my parents exchanging looks and engaging in some sort of wordless communication. We spent the remainder of the session working out concrete answers. Nathan joined us by phone, his voice coming through Shirley's speaker with the same professional serenity he usually had. He guided us through the repayment plan alternatives, detailing the various structures and deadlines. We agreed on $55,000 paid back over 2 years via a formal promissory note, with 30 monthly installments of around $1,800 each. Nathan said that this separated the gift and control aspects. They couldn't claim it was family money if they were legally obligated to repay it. The promissory note would be a legitimate contract with actual repercussions if they failed to pay. My mother looked unhappy as Nathan explained the requirements, but she consented. My father asked a few inquiries regarding interest rates and payment schedules in an attempt to negotiate better conditions, but Nathan immediately shut that down. This was not a corporate transaction where they could haggle. This was making up for what they had stolen without authorization. Nathan outlined the legal repercussions of failing to pay a promissory note amongst family members, and my father signed off on it. For the wedding, we decided that I would be treated as a complete guest, with no limits or special requirements. I wouldn't deliver a formal speech since I didn't want the pressure, nor did they. But I would be treated just like any other family member. Olivia spoke up, saying she wanted me at the head table close to her and Constantine. My parents consented without much argument, which seemed like significant progress. My mother even proposed that I sit between her and Olivia so that we could all be together. I appreciated the gesture, even though I knew it was largely to preserve the family image Mom valued so much. But at least this time, the picture included me rather than excluding me. The larger difficulty turned out to be the vendor dilemma. Lucas attended the conference via Shirley's laptop. His face filled the screen with the same intense expression he had when dealing with operational issues. He described the difficulties of resetting everything with only 7 days to the wedding. Some merchants had already scheduled alternate events within those time slots after AITA canceled. The florist had booked a business function. The DJ held a Sweet 16 celebration. The backup photographer had another wedding. We'd need to locate substitutes for at least 3 big vendors, probably 4, depending on the limo company's schedule. Lucas believed that we could recover around 70% of the original design, although some concessions would be required. The time frame was severe, and certain things were simply impossible to duplicate. He opened a spreadsheet that indicated which vendors were available and which were not, color-coded by priority level. My parents appeared concerned as Lucas went through each thing. Olivia stunned everyone when she interrupted Lucas in the middle of his explanation. She stated that she wanted to utilize this as a chance to scale back to the wedding she truly desired. Her voice was firmer now, not as wobbly as before. She and Constantine had discussed this and reached a conclusion jointly. They planned to reduce the guest list from 150 to 80 individuals, focusing on close friends and family rather than business acquaintances or distant relatives they knew little about. They intended to relocate from the enormous Horizon Estate ballroom to the smaller garden venue on the same site. This would make the vendor issue considerably easier because the garden site had a different schedule and required less services. It would also drastically lower expenditures, resulting in less financial hardship for everyone. Constantine instantly backed her up, saying that the adjustment will ease his parents. They'd been concerned about the cost and formality since the beginning. A smaller, more private wedding seemed appropriate for both of them. Shirley turned to my parents and asked them directly whether they could accept Olivia's decision, even if it went against their expectations. The hush dragged on for what seemed like forever. My mother's hands were tightly folded in her lap, and she kept glancing at my father, as if she were waiting for him to speak first. Finally, she responded yes. Quietly but clearly. My father took much longer to respond, and when he did, his face looked as if he had just eaten something terrible. But he nodded in agreement. Olivia let out a breath I hadn't realized she'd been holding, and Constantine gripped her palm. Shirley took notes on her pad and stated that she would collaborate with Lucas to arrange the improvements. She then concluded the discussion by telling everyone that this was progress, and that we should recognize it. Lucas called or texted me every couple hours with updates for the following 4 days, so my phone was practically always in my hand. He had his entire crew working on restructuring things, and it was chaotic but in a positive way. The sort where you can see everything coming together. The garden location at Horizon Estate was available, which was ideal because it was far more manageable than the big ballroom. Xavier got the florist back first since they had merely accepted a minor corporate position that allowed them to roam about. The DJ decided to uphold the original contract when Xavier explained the issue and offered a discount on future bookings. The photographer was difficult because she had already committed to another wedding on the same day, but Xavier found a replacement who had even better evaluations. The caterer was the only complete loss since they had scheduled a large anniversary celebration. But Xavier discovered an outstanding substitute that Olivia preferred. When he showed her their menu, she was ecstatic with the unique selections available. Things like fusion appetizers and unique beverages that the original caterer never proposed. I met with Isabella 3 times that week to completely recreate the videography package. She had all of the original plans, but I told her I wanted to manage the shoot myself rather than sending one of my regular teams. She looked astonished and asked if I was certain because it was family, and things might become tricky. That's exactly why I wanted to handle it myself, because this wedding had gone from being just another celebration to something far more significant. Olivia attended one of these sessions, and we spent the entire day talking over shot lists. She informed me about the most important events for her, such as the first glance with Liam, her mother assisting with the veil, and the toasts during dinner. She continued repeating she couldn't believe I was doing this for her, and I kept assuring her that was what I had planned to do from the beginning, before everything went wrong. My parents sent out the updated guest list, along with a note about trimming back to a more personal event. I saw the email since they copied me, and the phrasing was guarded, as if they didn't want to confess they made a mistake the first time. My mother contacted me the next day, and I could see she was worried about what people might say. Then she said something that astonished me. She claimed Olivia had made the correct decision, and she was not going to argue with her about it. Later that week I caught her on the phone with one of her friends discussing the adjustment, and she seemed pleased of Olivia for understanding what she wanted. It was strange hearing my mother speak in that manner because she typically needed to control everything. But perhaps Shirley's mediation was effective. My dad contacted me 4 days before the wedding, and this time it wasn't about logistics or vendor issues. He inquired about the state of my business, and although I attempted to respond quickly, he declined. He wanted to fully comprehend what I accomplished. So I described how Vision Media Group operated, how I had built up the vendor network, and what kind of commercial projects I worked on. He listened without interrupting, which may have been a first for our relationship. Then he stated that he had never understood my job and had formed assumptions based on his lack of knowledge in the business. He claimed that commercial filming consisted solely of creating YouTube videos or photographing weddings for a low cost. I told him about the Nike commercial and the Apple project, and he kept insisting he had no idea, as if he couldn't believe his kid had created something so successful. It wasn't a full apology, but it was the first time we'd had a serious discussion about my profession in 7 years. I awoke 2 days before the wedding to a long email from my mother. I read it on my phone before getting out of bed. I read it twice more because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. She wrote about how she and my father had been so preoccupied with projecting the ideal family image that they had lost sight of what was truly important. She said they had viewed me as a problem to be solved rather than a kid to be cherished. She admitted that they had made mistakes concerning my career, uninvited me, and taken my money without asking. She stated she wanted to do better in the future and hoped I would give them the opportunity to show it. When I read it, I felt something in my chest relax. Like a knot I'd been holding for years, it finally started to unravel. We held the rehearsal the day before the wedding in the garden site, which was lovely. The setting was intimate and personal in a manner that the large ballroom could never have been. Flowers were already being set up, and the natural light shining through the trees made everything appear gentle and pleasant. My parents arrived looking worried, but they were trying. I could see it. They made no comments regarding the lower size or attempted to suggest adjustments. My father really helped Constantine decide out where everyone should stand during the ceremony. Then he joked about me knowing how to use all of the forks at supper. And for once, it did not feel cruel. It seemed more like he was attempting to admit how ridiculous his fears had been. That evening, the immediate family went to eat at an Italian restaurant near the site. Olivia was more calm than I had seen her in months, as if a weight had been removed from her shoulders. Liam continued praising everyone for being accommodating to the modifications, while my parents kept reiterating it was Olivia's day, and they simply wanted her to be happy. They were quieter as usual, not dominating the conversation as they typically do. My father asked me about a project I was working on and genuinely listened to my response. My mother inquired about my equipment and was genuinely interested as I described the differences between the cameras I used. Sophia drew me aside as I walked to the restroom and told me Olivia had been so much happier since the wedding plans altered. She had previously been anxious and unhappy, but now she was eager about being married. On the morning of the wedding, I arrived to the garden site at 6:30 to set up my camera equipment. The sun was just about to rise, and the light was ideal. That warm golden tint makes everything appear lovely. I wandered about examining angles and arranging photos as Lucas's team did the final touches on the flowers and table decorations. The setting looked wonderful with its natural light and plants. Lucas arrived at 7:30 with coffee and joked about this being the most high-stakes shot. It wasn't simply about I've ever done photographing a wedding anymore. It was about showing my family what I was truly capable of. My parents arrived at 9 o'clock, and my mother immediately went to inspect the flower arrangements and table settings. She continued altering centerpieces in tiny increments and questioning Lucas's staff if the seats were properly situated. However, her voice sounded different than normal, less dominating, and more like she needed to accomplish something with her hands. My father spotted Constantine in the groom's suite and spent 20 minutes assisting him with his boutonniere, making jokes about how he had worn his sideways at his own wedding. I videotaped part of it through the window, not the polished views I'd use in the official video, but the candid moments that showed them attempting to be normal. Constantine chuckled at something my father said, and my father touched him on the shoulder, making it appear as if my father was having a discussion with someone, rather than acting for an audience. I kept the camera rolling while my mother fixed Constantine's tie and complimented him on his appearance. And as she went away, I noticed her frantically wiping her eyes, as if she didn't want others to see. These seemingly insignificant instances felt significant, as if they demonstrated that we were all capable of being kind to one another once we stopped thinking about looks. Olivia emerged from the bridal room at 9:30, and my mother lost it instantly. Before Olivia could even make it through the threshold, tears streamed down her cheeks, and she continued exclaiming how beautiful her baby was while trying not to smear her makeup. I grabbed my camera and filmed my mother assisting with the veil, her hands shaking slightly as she adjusted the cloth and tucked a strand of Olivia's hair back into place. There was something gentle in that moment. Something that made me wonder whether, below all of the status anxiety and control difficulties, my mother really cared about us in her own messed up way. Olivia attracted my attention as my mother fumbled with the veil and smiled at me. "This genuine," I chuckled, but he was not mistaken. Cheerful smile reminded me of when we were children. My father entered in the doorway and simply stood there staring at Olivia for a long time before saying, "She looked perfect." He spotted me shooting, and instead of making a joke about my working at my own sister's wedding, he simply nodded. It wasn't quite approbation, but more of a recognition that I was doing something worthwhile. He could see it now. The ceremony began at 10 o'clock, and it was wonderful in terms of simplicity and personalization. 80 people filled the outdoor space without overcrowding, and everyone could see and hear everything that transpired. I strolled between the rows with my camera, photographing how the dawn light filtered through the trees and illuminated Olivia's clothing. Constantine's tears streamed down her cheeks as she walked down the aisle. The way both sets of parents were sobbing out. This is what I do at work. Filming and beautifying people's crucial moments. However, today seemed different because my people, family and sister were getting married. I captured images of Sophia straightening Olivia's train and wiping away her own tears. Constantine's parents held hands during the vows. My father reached over to grasp my mother's hand when Olivia responded, "I do." Every frame was more important than any Nike commercial I'd ever done because this was the day my family began to perceive me as someone important. The event went into the garden pavilion, where guests ate, danced and rejoiced as I continued to shoot. Around midday, my father stepped up to deliver a toast, and I almost put down the camera because I wasn't sure I wanted to film what he was going to say. But then he began talking about both of his children and their successes, giving our real names and explaining our true jobs. For the first time, he specifically identified Vision Media Group. He said he was happy of Olivia for pursuing a profession in finance, and of me for establishing a successful production business, and that both of his children had selected spouses who supported their goals rather than attempting to modify them. It wasn't a complete apology for all that had transpired, and he didn't mention the wedding fiasco or the years of discounting my work. But it was an improvement. He was there in front of 80 people, claiming me as his successful son rather than denying my existence. And that meant something. I kept recording despite the fact that my hands were shaking somewhat. When he finished and everyone applauded, he looked directly at me and lifted his glass. Later in the evening, as things were winding down, Olivia took my arm and drew me away from the crowd. She told me she was glad I hadn't given up on the wedding or the family, and that seeing me establish limits showed her she could do the same. She said that this is why she felt strong enough to cut down to the wedding she really wanted rather than the spectacle our parents were organizing. We hugged, and I realized that maybe there was some good to come out of this catastrophe. She had discovered her voice and learned to say no to things that did not benefit her. And I'd discovered that I didn't have to tolerate being treated as a child simply because we were related. This calamity had forced both of us to mature slightly. As the reception ended, my mother approached me and asked if we could speak quietly. We went away from the pavilion and down the garden path, and she told me she had been thinking about how they had treated me over the years. She said that she and my father had been clinging on to an outmoded idea of who I was, seeing me as the awkward adolescent from prom, rather than the adult I'd grown into. She realized it wasn't fair to me or our relationship, and she wanted to start again with regular dinners where they listened rather than lectured. Her speech was subdued, and she kept staring at the ground rather than at me, as if she was embarrassed to speak all of this aloud. I told her honestly that I was willing to try, but it would take time to re-establish trust. The uninvitation and deposit problem were not unique events. They were part of a 7-year-long habit of contemptuous behavior. Every statement about obtaining a real job, every comparison to Olivia's CEO pals, and every time they treated my profession as a pastime rather than a company had contributed to this wall between us. She nodded, saying she understood and that she and my father were committed to doing the work through ongoing mediation sessions with Shirley. It wasn't a miraculous reunion in which everything instantly turned great, but it was a solid foundation for creating something better. The next week, I received a message on my phone indicating funds had been placed into my company account. I examined and found $3,000 with the remark, "First installment of 30. My parents had made their first payment on the repayment plan without my reminding them or sending Nathan after them, which felt substantial. I conveyed the message to Nathan, who acknowledged receipt and modified the promissory note in our files. Lucas noticed the email correspondence and joked about having all family members sign contracts before any future contacts. And truthfully, it wasn't the worst notion I'd ever heard. Perhaps putting everything in paper would require everyone to be explicit about expectations rather than making assumptions. 3 weeks after the wedding, I completed editing the movie and headed to Olivia and Constantine's apartment to give it. They sat on their couch and watched the entire event, while I stood anxiously near the door. And toward the end, they were both in tears. Olivia thought it was great that I had captured the essence of the day and made it lovely without being artificial. She shared several clips on social media that weekend, with a remark about how private weddings were preferable than large productions. And some of her CEO pals noted that they wished they had done something similar instead of the large festivities they had planned. Liam sent me a long note thanking me for the video and for making the wedding possible at all. We had another family meal a month after the wedding, but this time it was at my studio, allowing my parents to view my workstation. I gave them a tour of the equipment, editing bays, and the little soundstage we utilized for certain shots. They continued asking questions about how things worked. Then I showed them some of my commercial work, including a Nike commercial that was carried nationwide on sports channels. My father kept exclaiming, "You made this," as if he couldn't believe that his son had developed something that was being displayed to millions of people. My mother asked extensive questions regarding the production process, such as how many people were on site, how long it took to film and edit, and how the client approval process worked. It was odd to see them engaged in my work after years of dismissing it as creating small films. But I tried to answer everything honestly and show them what my job truly entailed. They remained for 4 hours, looking at various projects and asking questions. And after they went, my father shook my hand and said he was impressed. It wasn't everything I had hoped for from them, but it was more than I had previously received. At dinner we put up my laptop on the table and spoke with Shirley for our first follow-up. She arrived on screen with her notes and inquired about how everyone was doing with the agreements reached during the mediation. My parents sat stiffly at first, and my father cleared his throat before revealing that they were still adjusting to seeing me as a successful company owner rather than their child who dropped out of film school. My mother added that it was difficult to overcome old habits, but they were trying to catch themselves when they made disrespectful comments. I told Shirley honestly that I was still dealing with years of feeling invisible to them, that the hurt didn't magically go away because we had some good discussions, but I could tell they were trying, and that was important. Shirley agreed and went to her calendar, setting monthly video check-ins for the following 6 months so we could measure progress and address any backsliding before it became a major problem. After the call, my father helped me clear the dinner dishes without asking, which seemed like a minor but major change. Olivia and Constantine returned from their honeymoon in Costa Rica 3 weeks later, and they invited the entire family to see their images. They'd stayed at this lovely environmental resort right on the beach, which they could really afford because we'd drastically reduced the wedding budget. Olivia was showing us images of their private villa and the ziplining trip through the rainforest, and she seemed more calm than I had seen her in months. Constantine checked his phone for texts from wedding guests, and Olivia read a few aloud about how people were telling them it was the finest wedding they'd ever attended to because it seemed so personal and genuine rather than like a business affair. My parents sat on the couch listening, and my mother said she loved the smaller wedding more than she expected since she was able to have genuine talks with individuals rather than making small chat with a large throng. My father nodded, and I could see they were finally understanding that reducing the guest list had been the right decision, even if it wasn't what they had hoped for. 3 months after the wedding, I signed a large contract with a luxury vehicle company to photograph their full spring campaign. The budget was more than anything I'd done previously, and I asked my parents to attend one of the shoot days. They arrived at the downtown site, which we had closed up for 2 blocks to film, and I could see their expressions alter as they saw me oversee a crew of 15 people putting up lighting and cameras and working with the client's creative team. My father stood off to the side, taking it all in, and when the brand's marketing director arrived to discuss shot angles, my father introduced himself and stated that he was my father. The director's face lighted up as she began discussing how satisfied they were with my prior work and how competitive the bidding process had been for this campaign. My father's countenance swung between pride and apparent discomfort, and I could tell he was contemplating how incorrect he had been about my profession all these years. After we finished for the day, my parents lingered to ask questions regarding the production timeline and editing process. And my father kept remarking how professional everything looked, as if he couldn't believe this was actually my work. Several weeks later, at our most recent family meal, my parents brought a wrapped box and placed it on the table in front of me. I opened it and saw a framed photo from Olivia's wedding, one I took at the reception, of all of us together, smiling and calm. My mother's voice was calm when she said they wanted to remember this as a watershed moment for our family. When we decided to be honest with each other instead of pretending everything was all right. She stated that there were still difficult occasions where old tendencies emerged. My father almost said something negative about my job, and she caught herself attempting to maintain everyone's image. But we were creating something more tangible than what we had previously. Something based on genuine respect rather than preconceptions and past wounds. After that, I kept the framed portrait on my studio desk. A reminder that the respect I had strived for was slowly becoming a reality. And it was enough for now.